I hope you enjoyed the lunch. We'll resume with agenda item A13, Forum ISU Vision 2030, B, Safeguarding Opportunity and Unity. This morning, we talked a lot about priorities related to growth and innovation. Now let's go over these related to safeguarding opportunity and unity. While keeping our focus on growth, we will not make any compromise on keeping our sports safe, clean, fair, and sustainable. Safeguarding is a very difficult topic that deserves a lot more attention. It also covers a wide range of subtopics. To understand it better, we invited special guests to speak about this topic this afternoon. Our first guest is Ms. Kirsty Burrows, head of IOC's Safe Sport Unit. She will provide us with overview of safeguarding topics. I'd like to thank her, and I'd like to actually first invite her before thanking her, Ms. Burrows, for flying all the way from Lausanne to speak to us in person. Let's give a warm round of welcome.
Thank you, President, and I have to say, the honor is all mine. I'd like to really say thank you, not only for inviting me here to speak to you today on such important topics, but also to thank you for centralizing safeguarding and the mental health and well-being of athletes in your Vision 2030. So thank you for your leadership and really commend this excellent effort of the Ice Skating Union. So I'm here to talk about safe sport, safeguarding, and mental health. And we're going to start really by talking about the topic of holistic well-being and mental health. And then I have the great honor to be joined and listen to a conversation with Gracie Gold on these important topics. And then we'll move on to safeguarding. So to start with, I think the most important thing to share is that safeguarding for the International Olympic Committee is a strategic priority, as is mental health. Our Olympic Agenda 2020+5 recognizes the central importance of safe sport and the protection of athletes. So really looking to strengthen safe sport across the Olympic movement to protect not only the physical, but the mental well-being of all athletes. It's also, you may have heard, we just launched our Olympic AI agenda, looking at the positive ways that AI can support and influence the Olympic movement. And safeguarding and mental health are focus area 1. So really the way that we can use AI to support the health and well-being of athletes, again being a priority focus area for the International Olympic Committee. But what do we mean when we talk about safe sport? Safe sport is fostering psychologically and physically safe environments which are supportive, where participants can thrive and experience the full benefit of sports participation. So when we speak about safe sport, we talk about two halves of a whole, so it's both safeguarding and mental health, and the entire concept is around holistic athlete development. We take a public health approach to both safeguarding and mental health. And why do we take a public health approach? Because these are both endemic societal issues. Both safeguarding, or harassment and abuse, and mental health are endemic societal issues. Mental health, for example, has the highest disease burden for states globally. We recognize that there are some areas within the context of sport where there are higher risks around mental health and safeguarding. We also recognize there are some protective factors. With both of them, we can really foster safe sporting environments where athletes can thrive if we are intentional about it. And that's why, again, I commend ISU for centralizing these topics in your Vision 2030. When we talk about a public health approach, and I say these are endemic societal issues, and this is the part of my job which is never very nice, what we know from evidence is that interpersonal violence or harassment and abuse are endemic across society. In Europe, 1 in 5 children are the victims of sexual violence. 1 in 3 women. 1 in 6 men. So again, what we're looking at when we talk about safeguarding is not something that's just to do with sport, but we have to recognize that sport is a microcosm of society. What happens in the wider society will happen in sport, and sometimes there can be higher risk factors and protective factors, but higher risk factors. But there is also a lot that we can do to counteract those. So the evidence shows, for example, that in elite athletes, the prevalence rates of sexual violence are at a minimum 13%. So again, we see similar rates as in broader society, but we don't want any. When we talk about mental health and well-being, again, the prevalence rates of mental health symptoms and disorders in elite athletes is similar to the general population, around 1 in 3. 34% of current elite athletes, for example, have experiences of suffering, anxiety, or depression. Some mental health symptoms and disorders are higher in elite athletes, and others are lower. But again, these are broad societal issues which also exist within the context of sport, and in sport there is something that we can do about them. So what we look to do is seek multiple pragmatic ways to reduce the risk, to support athletes, to centralize their health and well-being, and fundamentally to foster sporting environments where athletes and everybody can thrive, because that's what we want, right? A lot of our work, what we try and ensure is that our work is athlete-led. The athlete voice is critical and essential, and again, that's why I'm really honored to be in the presence of Gracie Gold today. When we talk about athlete-led, I'd like to give you an example. During the Gangwon Youth Olympic Games 2024, we asked the athletes, we had 1,224 responses, what 3 words come to mind when they could think of an unhealthy environment? What is health to them? What is an unhealthy environment to them? And this is what they came up with. As you can see, many of these things relate to safeguarding, bullying, abuse, unsafe. It also relates to mental health, sadness, depression, intimidation, sleep problems, nutrition, and it also relates to doping. These are the intrinsic way that we then take all this together and you say, okay, this is what ill health looks like. This is what unhealthy sports environments look like to athletes. Nobody wants an unhealthy sports environment, so how can we centralize our efforts, focus on these areas to create healthy environments for athletes? And this is direct from the voice of athletes who are 15 to 18 years old at the Winter Youth Olympic Games. The other thing that we really want to try and push, which is really important to us, is that safe sport environments are synonymous with excellence. Safe sports environments are synonymous to high-performance environments. How do we know this? Well, I'm really pleased to see some evidence that's coming out, and we're seeing more and more evidence, and more research is being done here. But I'd like to point to one study, which is, I think, pioneering. This study looked at, they call it serially winning coaches, serially successful coaches. They had 14 serially successful coaches from 11 countries across 10 sports. Between them, those 14 serially winning coaches had 128 medals from their athletes. And they looked at the environment that these coaches, they looked at the commonalities in their coaching and training environment. And what they found was that vision, people, and environment were the highest things. It was conscientiousness around athletes, respect and conscientiousness, which was continually coming up as the highest factors that these 3 coaches had in common. This shows us that an environment that centralizes the health and well-being of athletes is a winning environment. And I think that's really critical and really important. So onto the topic specifically around mental health. This is something, again, which we're really proud of, some of the work that's been happening in mental health, both across the Olympic movement and also led by the Safe Sport Unit. Mental health, again, just to reiterate, it's something which is intrinsic and central to the IOC strategic priorities, reflected in the Charter, the Code of Ethics, the Olympic Movement Medical Code, the Athletes' Rights and Responsibility Declaration, and indeed, Olympic Agenda 2020+5. What we centralize this around is the fact that human well-being must be at the heart of athletic performance. So athletes, this is a quote from Abhinav Bindra, Olympic champion and a member of the IOC Athletes Commission. Athletes should feel empowered and nurtured both physically and mentally. Mental health and physical health are 2 halves of a whole, and care for both must be seen as a priority. And it's a key priority for athletes. What we always try and do is listen. We did a survey through Athlete 365, and we asked the athletes about some of their key priorities, and mental health flagged as one of the key priorities for athletes. And so we centered our efforts on it. We also know that a lot has to be done. So at the moment, 41% of NOCs offer psychological support for athletes. And when we look at the percentage of athletes who feel comfortable speaking out for help, we found that 80% of athletes do not seek support when experiencing issues. And this is, again, something that is reflected in broader society. Therefore, and I'll show you our strategy, both of these things are things that we're focusing on. Mental health support across the board, access to mental health support, destigmatizing mental health, and helping people to feel that they can speak up when they're experiencing any kind of challenge related to their mental health and well-being. So when we did a broad review across the Olympic movement, we found a couple of things related to the status of mental health when it comes to sport. And we found that in general, and I say again, commending the ISU now for prioritizing these topics, we found that mental health was not so prioritized. There was a scarcity in reliable screening tools. There's a lot of stigma and poor literacy around mental health, unequal access to care, and unequal access to the benefit of sport. Now, I would say again, these are not sport-specific, apart from the last one. These are not sport-specific. A stigma around mental health is something which is broad across society. So our mental health lead in the Safe Sport unit developed an action plan which has 5 thematic areas: culture and leadership, measurement and research, reducing the prevalence rate and promoting well-being, improving the care environment, and improving access to the mental health benefits of sports. And that's in our mental health action plan, which has 12 objectives related to those 5 key areas. What I think is critical, and I'd like to really re-emphasize, is that the work on mental health that we do, and the work that I see as well being really driven by ISU, is that mental health and well-being, it's not just the absence of a mental health stigma or disorder. When we talk about physical health, we don't just mean not being sick, right? We mean being fit, being well. This is the same for mental health. It's not just about placing importance on mental health in terms of when somebody has a mental health challenge, for example, are experiencing a mental health symptom or disorder. We're actually focusing on mental well-being, thriving within the context of sport, and that's really critically important. And of course, having systems in place if someone is experiencing a mental health challenge. So really, the public health approach is around treatment, prevention, but pushing towards education, really centralizing this conversation. And I'd like to take you through a couple of the pragmatic initiatives that we're developing in order to support mental health and well-being, which are accessible and available to all. We have many different learning tools and educational tools around mental health and well-being. We have the Athlete 365 career program, which recognizes how tough transition from athletic to post-athletic career is. We have a diploma in mental health and also a certificate in mental health, and the ISU Mental Health in Elite Athletes Toolkit and other initiatives, including, for example, a recognition tool, which helps anybody, coaches, athletes, friends, families, recognize when somebody may be in need of further support around mental health and well-being. And these are some initiatives which are specific to Paris and will be continuing, of course, to Milano Cortina. We have the Mentally Fit Helpline. This is a helpline that's available during the Olympic Games and for 4 years afterwards to all Olympians and Paralympians. It ensures support in over 70 languages by licensed and registered mental health practitioners and specialized counselors. We're also, again, these are all examples of how we're really focusing the importance that the IOC places on mental health. In Paris, for the first time, and we will continue this through, we're going to have a specific mind zone, the Athlete 365 mind zone in collaboration with Powerade. This is a zone just above the gym, so we're trying to say physically fit in the gym, mentally fit, right upstairs, 2 halves of a whole. This zone is completely designed around decompression. So we hear that the athlete village is great, but it's extremely noisy, it can be very loud, and it's really important. Again, this is the messaging also that we place on this. This is important, this is our focus area. So we have the Athlete 365 Mind Zone, which is above the gym, And we've worked together with Powerade to even develop, for example, a bespoke VR-guided meditation and mindfulness activity. We're going to have sleep pods. The entire area is around mental health and relaxation. And it's going to be staffed by my team, who have been trained now in mental health first aids as well. So really ensuring that anyone that is in need of further care, we have the full program in place. And what I'm really excited about is the cyber abuse prevention tool. Some of you may have heard of it. For Paris, for the first time, we are utilizing an AI provider who is going to help us scan and detect in real time, at scale and pace, targeted online abuse towards athletes. We're going to be covering all Olympians competing in Paris. All Paralympians in Paris are also able to access this tool, and also entourage and officials, because we know they are also can be highly at risk of online violence. So this AI tool is in effect going to scan in real time and at pace online abuse targeted towards athletes and entourage members. If it's flagged, then the abuse will then be, there's an expedited channel to the platform to get the abuse removed. If it's criminal, the information will be packaged and sent to law enforcement. We are taking a stance against online violence, recognizing that athletes should be able to communicate with their friends, with their fans, with their sponsors, without the fear of, at any point in the day or night, being targeted by online violence. And this is a quote from Lindsey Vonn around the AI abuse prevention tool. AI abuse prevention tool, yeah, the online violence prevention tool that we're using, which will really hopefully enhance the Olympic experience. What I want to also raise is that for us also, we're going to be able to see what type of abuse is being directed at athletes. We're going to be able to see trends, the typology of violence. And this is really important because we want to develop data-driven policies to prevent online violence, because we know it's something that athletes, especially those with a very high platform, high exposure, especially female athletes, experience at high levels. And so now I'd like to pass the floor over to someone who can really speak about this topic, to Gracie Gold, President. Are you happy with the...
Thank you, Ms. Burrows. Thank you very much. I think we all want to hear more from her, so we'll make sure to bring her back to the stage. Thank you for the comprehensive overview of the safeguarding topic, safe sports issues, and thank you for highlighting the importance of mental health of our precious athletes. I think this is a natural time that we invite the next speaker, Ms. Gracie Gold. She's a decorated skater. I watched her competing at the Sochi Olympics live, and I've been a fan of her since then. She's won the bronze medal in the Sochi Games, but not only that, she won multiple medals at the various Grand Prix series, two-time U.S. national champion. But she's here because she also wrote a book, recent New York Times bestseller, very provocative book title, Out of Shape, Worthless Loser. In her book, she shares her very personal story, very personal journey, starting from being a golden girl after the Sochi Olympic Games to entering a treatment facility for mental challenges. Gracie has been a leading voice for athlete safety and mental health, and she's here not only to share her story, but help us to begin the conversation regarding athletes' mental health. Gracie is joined on stage by Ms. Barb Raychard, U.S. figure skating's longtime communication lead. She's been working closely with Gracie since Gracie was a junior skater. So without further ado, let's welcome our next speakers.
Thank you, Jayoul and the ISU for inviting us, and more importantly, for bringing this conversation about athlete mental health to an open conversation, so we appreciate being here. Gracie, I would be remiss if we did not acknowledge the recent passing of your coach, Frank Carroll, who so many people in this room knew, worked with over the decades, and who brought so much to our figure skating community.
Although my story and journey with Frank didn't end in the way that I had dreamed of, it's still one of my favorites, and it's a huge loss for the skating community.
Let's get talking about what we're here to talk about. So as Mr. Kim said, you recently wrote a New York Times best-selling book, Out of Shape, Worthless Loser. In that book, Gracie, you discuss the pressure of trying to be perfect, not only on the ice, but in every day, in appearance, in performance. Can you talk a little bit about what that pressure and what that was like for you?
Well, although my parents gave me this wonderful name, I will say in Olympic sports, having the name Gracie Gold, it sounds like a stage name, and anything less than gold always felt like a disappointment. And in some ways, and I was compared to Grace Kelly and was this ice princess, and I felt, I mean, the whole sport is to be perfect, right? We try to do the most difficult things possible while making them look effortless. It's not just what we do, but it's how we look while we're doing it. I am already, I would say high-strung, I guess I can lean into that, and a perfectionist, and all of this put together almost killed me. And when it comes to mental health, I feel that I was unable to speak up because it would have shattered this perfect image, right? And as Olympians, we're seen as superheroes a lot of the time, and people forget that mental health doesn't discriminate on how successful you are and how many medals you have, race, gender, age, ethnicity. It can happen to anyone at different times, and it doesn't have to fit in these parameters that we often give mental health crises. You can be wildly successful and still suffer.
You know, Gracie, in the earlier run-up to your career and when you really just kind of burst on the international stage in Sochi, 2014, there was that perception of you being perfect. You were in advertisements. I remember walking through Denver International Airport and seeing you more than life-size. You were on the United commercials. There was expectation of you being perfect. Things were starting to creep up for you right around that time and a little bit after. Can you share with us what some of those early signs of your mental health challenges were?
Looking back, I started to have some symptoms much earlier than by the time that I checked into treatment, but I was part of the stigma as well, and I was very ignorant about what mental health looked like, right? Because I thought, what do I have to complain about? You know, why would somebody like me be depressed? As well as everyone is typically very comfortable talking about mental health as long as it fits their definition of what that mental health issue is, and as long as it doesn't affect them. So for me, I thought that depression, you know, you had to check off these boxes, right? It had to be after something bad happened, and, you know, only specific bad things that qualified, you know, being fourth at the World Championships, I thought didn't like fit the bill, for example. You know, I thought the world is blue and you just cry a lot, and that was my definition of depression. But in fact, mine manifested in ways that was different. I was very apathetic. I suddenly, for somebody who cares about everything all the time, I suddenly didn't care about anything. I had trouble getting out of bed. I didn't want to do extra run-throughs. So that read to a lot of people as suddenly I was lazy, I lost my spark, as well as I became, I was kind of agitated all the time, and I had my fuse with people got shorter, and I was very difficult to be around. I certainly understand why it was hard to help me at that time, but you know, I was agitated very easily, and these were symptoms that I didn't even myself register as potentially a mental health crisis. I just thought this sudden change of behavior was that I had lost my spark, or I just didn't have what it took anymore. You know, I just couldn't hack it. I thought that it was some sort of personal failure on my part. It didn't occur to me until much later that perhaps the chemicals in my brain had changed in a way, and that I not only needed help, but that there was help available to me.
Now, Gracie, I've known you for a long time, and you've always been really popular with your peers. They like you because you're fun, you're funny, and they started to notice a change in you too, and you told me you started to push them away. Do you know why?
This is a really good question. I wish that I had been more self-aware in my youth. I mean, don't we all? But I just felt very disconnected. One of my other symptoms was I had started dissociating. I mean, there are events and social interactions that I don't even really remember. I was almost losing time. I just was so separate from the world. I kind of describe it that I felt that I was in the snow globe, and I could see the rest of the world existing around me, and I could show up to the rink, but I just couldn't quite connect. And, I could hear people tapping, we have events coming up and this, and, responsibilities trying to burrow under, but I just felt stuck in the snow globe. And when people did try to help me, and then at some point I thought that I was too far gone. And again, that I wasn't worthy of help because, again, I read mental health as these were behavioral choices that I was making to just not be competitive anymore. And right as I said, I just kept thinking that I lost my spark or my edge, that I just had very much become this out of shape, worthless loser, and that I just didn't fit the bill anymore. And when I I didn't know what my place was in the sport of skating, and it was the only place that I had ever known. So when I felt like I lost my place within the world, I really considered that perhaps it didn't need me anymore.
So then what finally led you to seek help?
Help was, I didn't exactly run into the arms of, the people at the treatment facility, but when it was broached to me by two brave individuals, because again, I was not particularly warm during this period of time or approachable, and I guess if anything, it's strange, but my curiosity, I've always been a very curious person. Barb thinks this answer is hilarious. But,
I think this answer is very peculiar.
No, but I was just simply curious if there was a better way to live life, and I didn't know anything about the world of mental health or what a treatment center looked like or what this experience would be like, and I have always been a bit of a realist, some might say a pessimist, so the concept of waking up every single day just ready to go, I've never been, my sister was sunshine and I was storm cloud is probably how my mom would put it, but I've always been a little bit curious, and so I ended up saying yes, that I would go to treatment and see what this experience was like, and that's when I learned, sometimes just being curious about what the future holds is enough, and that it's a misconception that you have to be just so grateful and hopeful and optimistic all the time. Not all of us are Jason Brown, is what I used to say. Not all of us are him, sometimes you're Gracie Gold. But it was my curiosity that led me to treatment and ultimately saved my life.
Which is rather amazing that your curiosity led you to start this path toward mental wellness, toward mental health. We've talked a lot about you as a child. You and I have talked over many coffees, we get caffeinated well, about you as a child and as a young athlete and now as an adult athlete. What would you tell young Gracie or young athletes now? What would you like to share or tell them about mental well-being?
I guess I'd like to acknowledge that it is just as important as physical health. I feel that it's put in that we have physical health and then it's separate somehow from mental health, which is then even further separate from some specialties like disordered eating. And in fact, they're all actually should fall under the same umbrella, right? If mental illness occurs in the brain, that's part of the physical body. And to take them just as seriously, nobody questions when I broke my foot. I immediately went to the hospital. There was no question about it. We had a PT plan set up. We had massage therapy, every single treatment you could think of. Everybody was standing there to help. And then I felt that when I was struggling mentally, a lot of people stood back or they said, oh, well, maybe you should look into that. Good luck. Hope it gets better. And and I also leaned into that. As I said, I thought that these were behavioral choices that I made. I thought these were faults in my character because, again, unaware, I was like, well, Michelle Kwan doesn't have, right? She was my idol. I was like, this doesn't happen if you want to go to the Olympics. I thought that I could just tough it out, right? I thought this was a shortness of character. And so to just take it as seriously, and if I did reach out when I was younger and it wasn't received well, instead of shutting down and coming back into my isolation tower, if anything, I would have taken that. It should have been a signal of how long that person should be in my life if they're unreceptive to it, and that's what I say, that really tells you everything you need to know about them and nothing about you. And same with just taking it seriously. and that it's not a joke, it's not something trivial, it's not something to brush off lightly. How many more dead Olympians do we need before we realize that there is a mental health crisis among elite athletes?
How would you encourage that young athlete that may not be able to understand what's happening to him or her? How would you encourage that young athlete to approach or express some of that?
I think in some ways that can be a case by case basis, but I think the first step is trying. And I think in a sport maybe specifically like figure skating that's all about perfection, right? Everything is choreographed. I sometimes worried about not being able to communicate clearly, so then I didn't communicate at all, right? And raised in that mentality of if you're not gonna do something at 100%, it's not worth doing. When in fact, even if you do 20% of something, you're still 100% better off than if you did 0%. And I wish that I would have had the courage to try and communicate, even if it wasn't perfectly executed, even if I was concerned maybe somebody wouldn't receive it well, to simply have the courage to try to live a different and or better life would have been crucial, and that's what I would encourage young athletes to do.
What's fascinating about that is that we have so many people in leadership here in this room right now from the ISU, member federations, so many adults here who work with children or their work they do affects our young athletes across the board. What do you want them to know?
I think as we saw in like the wonderful presentation before this, but listening to what the athletes have to say, and not just listening, but actually hearing it and implementing it. So again, a lot of the ideas that I'm sure have circulated in walls, in rooms like this before are really great, but how are they actually getting not just to our Olympians, but to the Olympians for the next cycle and the next cycle? Who is, I was in the middle of Glen Ellen, Illinois at a tiny rink, 14, 15, 16. Where were those, how does that girl get those resources? And that it's not just once you've already made it to the Olympics that you're blessed with it, but how do we get it to, the next generation? Again, that kid in the middle of Chicago suburbs, what resources does the sporting world have for her? Because at this time, I wouldn't know. I would know everything about physical health, how to help her, but I don't know what I would say for mental health.
So in addition to providing mental health, what about the education to allow that little athlete, that young person, how do we start to speak to them in a way that this leadership can speak to them?
I mean, that's a really good question. Again, I think, to answer, again, the question before, something I wish that the younger generation, and I think they're doing a pretty good job of this, but again, being educated about mental health and how it can manifest. One thing I will say is I wish I would have been educated on how serious something like disordered eating is. And in endurance sports, it is extremely prevalent. It's extremely prevalent just with people in general, like the younger adults, but that's something that can be lifelong, right? It's classified as an addiction, and it's something that I'll certainly just carry with me forever. And being educated about the importance of it and the effects after you leave the sports, I think can be a very big thing. And so education, just again, from not just the people in this room, but all the way down to that random kid in the middle of nowhere who wants to be in the Olympics, they need the resources too, because that's where it starts.
I've greatly appreciated that you've taken on this topic, and you're an advocate in this space. I was telling some friends here how last week you spoke at the General Assembly of the United Nations in New York, and now Grace is here talking to us at ISU Congress. So we greatly appreciate your advocacy and putting all this, your personal story out there for the public. So I greatly appreciate that. I would like to open this up for questions. Gracie's willing to take a handful of questions in our time left. If you would like to ask Gracie a question, please go to one of the microphones and wait to be acknowledged, and love to hear what anyone has to ask Gracie.
First, I just want to thank Gracie for being here and for being so open and vulnerable and honest, and to say that you're an incredible role model for the athletes. I'm here with the Athletes Commission, and I feel like there is more to do from the athlete side. I think the data that Ms. Burrows presented was shocking, but not surprising, that 80% of those suffering don't seek professional help. And I feel like maybe to fill that gap, there's something that the Athletes Commission can do, and maybe together with you. Thank you. Not that tall, but. So I was wondering if we could maybe continue this conversation with our group, and if there's some kind of initiative that the athletes could take to create some kind of athlete-led support group that would maybe fill that gap between, I think the onus is on the adults to safeguard the children, but at the same time, I think there is a bridge to be created to fill the gap. And I was hoping that you could continue that conversation with our group, and wonder if you could maybe brainstorm with us any strategies moving forward where we could create a more collective, accepting space for people to just be as vulnerable as you've been.
So Gracie, and thank you, Evan, for that. Thank you very much. So
I'd love to.
So coming back on what Mr. Evan Bates was just saying, Gracie, what do you see the role of the more mature adult athlete in this space? What is your role? What is our role?
Well, amongst the athletes, and Evan, I'd love to continue this conversation, because one of the most cathartic parts of going to treatments, both inpatient and outpatient, was the connection amongst peers, and in a very non-competitive, like outside of the rink kind of space, and the connection to be, we're already in rehab, there's no benefit to holding back now, was one of my favorite parts, was even our morning community meetings. And I think that there's, the role of some of the older, perhaps been around the block athletes, I think that there's a really great idea. I think there's definitely something there that I'd love to talk about further.
All right, I want to thank Gracie for sharing your story, always being such an open and honest book, shall we say. And again, Jewel and everyone at the ISU, thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Gracie, for sharing your very personal story. Your courage has sent a strong message not only to us, but also to young athletes. And you taught us how important we should treat mental health issues. And I can promise you that ISU will continue to pay a lot of attention to the mental wellness of our athletes, as well as physical safety of our precious athletes. Once again, I thank you for flying down here and sharing your story and your time with us. Thank you very much. Now, I'd like to invite Kirsty Burrows back to the stage.
Thank you very much. I'd just like to say again, that was absolutely phenomenal and so important to hear directly. Thank you, Gracie, for your courage. Thank you for speaking up. Anything that I said before is, meaningless compared to what Gracie shared. But really, so many of her points just cannot agree more. And also to Mr. Bates about the onus not being on the athletes. This is, in both of the topics that I focus on, my team focus on, mental health and safeguarding, we really try and reiterate that point. The onus has to be on the environment and ensuring that people within that environment have the possibility and the knowledge and awareness to recognize when someone might be in need of further support. So thank you again. And I now have the pleasure to talk about safeguarding. When we talk about safeguarding, so we're talking about all proactive measures to both prevent and appropriately respond to concerns related to harassment and abuse, and to promote holistic approaches to athlete welfare. And again, holistic approaches to athlete welfare isn't just a buzzword. For me, it really means creating that environment where athletes can thrive, and that essentially means an environment where it's okay to be able to speak up, or even that you don't have to be the one that speaks up because it's recognized. The really discussions around mental health and well-being are normalized within that space. So it's really ensuring all those participating in sport experience a safe sporting environment, the proactive actions taken to address and respond to issues of harassment and abuse, and creating a fair and respectful environment that prioritizes physical, emotional, and mental well-being. And again, I love what Gracie said about, two halves of a whole, but all intertwined. All of these are social determinants of health. So it's really important that we consider when we talk about health, it's not just about having a broken ankle, it's about health in all its forms. So forms of harassment and abuse in sport, so we know that psychological abuse is at the core, but the 5 forms of harassment and abuse in sport they relate to physical abuse, psychological abuse, sexual harassment, and neglect. And I should just say a point here, if anybody needs to take a break from this discussion, because sometimes it is really heavy and we promote safe environments, please feel free to do so at any point. So this is what we talk about when we talk about harassment and abuse in sport. We're focusing here on interpersonal, but I think what's really, really important is recognizing that there's also systemic elements to harassment and abuse, as well as the interpersonal, and also individual. So a way to kind of conceptualize this is if we talk about safeguarding and anti-doping. So for example, our IOC consensus statements recognizes forced or mandated systemic doping programs as a form of organizational violence. If somebody is forced to dope within a power-differentiated relationship, that's also recognized in the consensus as a form of interpersonal violence. And doping can also be a form of individual violence. So for example, if the substance poses a potentially negative impact to their health and well-being, and the risk of sanction, of course. So this is a way to conceptualize what we mean by those 3 forms, those 3 levels that we see when we talk about harassment and abuse. Unfortunately, again, harassment and abuse happens, we know, in all sports disciplines, at all levels of participation, although it's important to note that elite athletes are at higher risk. The evidence shows elite athletes are at higher risk. Usually, harassment and abuse occurs within a power-differentiated relationship, whether that's real or perceived. And also, we see really high levels of peer-on-peer violence, so this is really important to reflect and note as well. And it's by and towards men and women. This is a really important point for us. We try to break down any stereotypes around abuse. Oftentimes, it's considered to be something that is mainly towards women. In broader society, women and girls are disproportionately affected by abuse. Yes, they're not the only ones, but they are disproportionately affected. But within the context of sport, for example, there was a massive study done in Europe, over 10,000 participants from 6 European countries, and boys reported higher levels of violence in all 5 categories. It's really important for us to destigmatize the conversation, because if we place a focus on a certain group or a certain sport or a certain country or anything else, what we do is we increase the vulnerability of other athletes. So it's really important to sort of take away any of the misconceptions around this, particularly in the context of sport. The impacts of harassment and abuse, this is another thing, this is why I love my job, the way that we sit. I sit in the medical and scientific department, and the reason why is because there are bi-directional relationships around interpersonal violence, mental health and well-being, and physical health and well-being. They're all interconnected, and that's why we can't separate one from the other. We have to look at this again in a holistic perspective. But we know that the impacts of harassment and abuse include physical impacts, cognitive impacts, emotional impacts, behavioral impacts, mental health, economic and relational impacts as well. So I wanted to show, I love data. I feel like second best, okay, second best isn't really fair because the voice of athletes should be central and further, and there's very hard for anything to come second. But in the absence of when we don't have the opportunity to always hear directly from athletes around these important topics, which again, I'm so pleased and grateful to heard from Gracie today, but is about data, really bringing the voices of athletes, and that's what we try and do as well, try and bring the voices of athletes forward into fantastic occasions such as this. So again, this is related to the survey that I told you about, 1,226 young athletes, 15 to 18 years old, and you see here that almost 15% of them came from skating. And I wanted to show you some of the results because it's fresh off the press, although it hasn't actually been published yet, so please don't publish it. It will be published. But we asked the athletes in Gang 1 questions around safe sport. And I wanted to show you, this is specifically the data related to the skating athletes. So we asked them their understanding of what constitutes harassment and abuse, and it's fair to say they had a pretty good understanding of what constitutes harassment and abuse. Oftentimes, there's a normalization of certain behaviors within sport, so it's not considered as something which would constitute abuse. But we see here that there was quite high levels of knowledge and awareness. And we asked them, we said afterwards, all of these are forms of harassment and abuse. Does that surprise you? And you can see here 34% said yes, and 66% said no. So in general, I would say there's quite good awareness, although this is also something that we seek to also reiterate, what constitutes harassment and abuse in sport. Now, what's really important is for me to say is that not all harassment and abuse is criminal, right? But it doesn't have to be. We in sport can set our rules where we say this is something which is acceptable or not acceptable. This is what harms athletes, and this is what is okay. So it's about actually setting the level for what we expect athletes to experience, and any form of harassment and abuse should breach that level. When we ask them, do you think harassment and abuse occurs in your sport? This is always the figures that are the most shocking, including for us. We've done this study. We did it in Lausanne, Youth Olympic Games. We did it in Buenos Aires. We'll do it in Dakar. And the figures are always pretty similar. So here you can see 44% of these athletes who are young said that they think harassment and abuse likely or very likely occurs within their sport. It was similar to all the other sports, just to say, because I've extracted the data around skating for you because this is your sport, but it was similar to the others. And I think we can say this has been consistent across the Youth Olympic Games since we've done this study. And considering these are minors, mostly, really important, also really re-energizes us, not that we need it, into the focus and care and attention we place on this topic. I think this is super interesting. I hope you find this data interesting too, but for me it's really interesting because, again, it's bringing the voice of what the athletes say, because we can try and develop policies, we can try and develop procedures, we can try and develop links to help and support, but unless we hear from athletes such as Gracie, like your Athletes Commission, unless we hear through these surveys actually what does help, we'll always miss the mark. And what we try to do in the IOC Safe Sport Unit is help sports and ourselves to meet that mark. So where would they go if they were to report something? It was mainly someone in their club, someone in their family, safeguarding officer. The police is way down there. A helpline's also way down there, which is interesting for the helpline that we set up. But also, I think this is really critically important because what this tells us is that we need to develop more training and information and education for people in the clubs, right? For coaches, for the members of the entourage, for the physios. Physios are super important, and I'm not just saying that because I'm a physio originally by training. But the people that are around them, it's really important that they have training, education, awareness on recognizing signs and symptoms, and also on what to do if somebody discloses, because that's critical. When I work with survivors, I have the great honor of working with victims and survivors a lot in my job, and they often tell me that that one moment where they first disclose is one of the most important moments of their life, and the reaction of the other person means everything. So what to do when somebody discloses. And I just want to say as well, I mentioned that this is a broad societal issue as well. We see high cross-victimization in sport, which basically means oftentimes it might not be something that's happening within sport. It might be happening in the immediate family or in other areas. But again, equipping people within sport, when we consider how endemic this issue is across society, with the knowledge, information, and awareness of what they should do, but on a proactive, not on a reactive level, what they should do if somebody does speak about concern is essential. We asked them how much they agree with the following, and really good news, there's some great stats here. So we asked them how much they agree with the fact that in their environment there is always a person they can trust and share their concerns and feelings with. This is, by the way, the data, all the other data was specifically for the skating athletes. This is for all of the athletes, it's not specific to skating, or the 1,226 that responded. If they feel accepted for who they are in their sports environment, if they feel they're treated fairly and respectfully, if they get medical care whenever they need it, if it listens to them and takes their opinion seriously, and if they're comfortable seeking mental health and support whenever they need it. And I think there's some really good stats here. I think there's a lot of reason to be positive, but there's also, in this data, I think, it also shows there's still a lot of work to be done, and that's across the board. And again, why I really commend ISU and President Jaul for the focus on these topics here. So what can we do? What is our responsibility? Well, it's first of all to be aware. I mean, when we talk about safeguarding, it's everyone's responsibility. I mentioned at the beginning that you have like organizational, interpersonal, and individual. You have the power here. You are the organizational. Setting that culture is within your power and your possibility. So that's really, really important. And we know that the organizational is an enabler for the interpersonal, either in a positive or a negative way. So that's awesome. So safeguarding is everyone's responsibility, and particularly at the top level. We have the great honor of President Bach being a real champion of the safeguarding topic. Your president is a champion of this topic, so this is fantastic. That organizational leadership is there. Recognizing that, so showing solidarity, that's really, really important. Showing solidarity, listening, defend, and get involved. Inaction is not an option. There is a role for everyone to play within this. So really positive action is fantastic, and the fact that everyone's listening to me today and I can really see engagement is just really wonderful, so I'm very grateful. And also taking care. We seek to ensure that there are safeguarding leads or members of the Athletes Commission that are trained as safeguarding focal points, but it's really important that their well-being is also taken into account, because I speak from experience, you hear a lot. And it's really important about taking care of your people as well that are working in this space. Have a great relationship with Christina, who's doing a fantastic job for the ISU. So really making sure the well-being of everybody is important. And almost finally, I'd like to take you through, of course, being based in Switzerland, I have to have a presentation with Swiss cheese as a metaphor. But I wanted to make this conversation a little bit less daunting, because I think sometimes, it's actually very interesting. I had to do a testimony in front of the European Parliament a while ago. And there's a question where they said, okay, what is sport doing to prevent violence? And you have to think to yourself, well, what is society doing to prevent violence? What is society doing to make response to violence better? This is a critical challenge, not just for us, but it's a critical challenge across the board. Violence is endemic. But what can we do? We in sport have the possibility to implement measures to reduce the risk of violence towards athletes, and critically, to make sure there is an appropriate response if harm does occur. And I'll take you through both of these. So what can we do for prevention? Well, first of all, I wanted to say, unfortunately, there is no magic bullet. But what we use is the Swiss cheese metaphor. So whilst there is no magic bullet, there are a number of things that can be done which reduce the risk of violence from occurring. Now, sometimes, unfortunately, the violence will still get through. That's that red arrow. And the person in blue is the athlete. But if we have more preventative measures in place, then there is a higher probability that at some point there will be the violence that will be blocked. So effectively, having a safeguarding policy, essential. Having a risk assessment can also, these are just examples of the cheese levels, right? Having a recruitment process, which can routinely ask, for example, for references from the last employer, et cetera, et cetera. So basic recruitment things to ensure that we're checking on the sort of style of the person in terms of the treatment towards athletes as part of the factor. Education and training for all stakeholders, a code of conduct. These are all just examples of things that can be done. And as you can see, if we have some of these measures in place, and some of these measures are really simple to put in place, it reduces the risk of abuse occurring within our environment. So in this case, for example, it was the education and training, which was the thing that managed to block the abuse from happening, but it can be anything. So there's lots of different steps, and we have many tools and initiatives to help you implement those steps. And we're working together with fantastic trained safeguarding officers, such as Christina, in order to help organizations have those systems and structures in place. For example, the IOC Safeguarding Officer Certificate, which she's an alumni of, very grateful for that. This is a certificate that the IOC developed with Sports Oracle. The third cohort have just done their exams, so we now have 250 certified safeguarding officers from more than 80 countries. This is not an easy course. It's a 7-month-long course. It's the 3 exams, and what we're trying to do is really create an army of professionals who really know what they're talking about across the Olympic movement. And now we're also developing a focal point course, which will be a lot lighter to ensure accessibility to safeguarding officers and safeguarding focal points. We're about to launch this. Based on our IOC certificate, Safeguarding Officer in Sport, you will soon, I think it's in the version now, we're just testing it, so it should launch even this week. We've got a tool where you'll be able to search by the language the safeguarding officer speaks, by the country that they're in, by their speciality, if they're specialized in education, prevention, response, etc. So this will be launched this week on Athlete 365, and we're going to have all the safeguarding officers that complete our course who agree to be on this will be in there, and you'll be able to contact them as well. So if you're looking for advice or support in your country, we'll be really pleased. This tool should hopefully be a good one for you. Again, we're trying to focus on pragmatic tools and initiatives. So what's available? We're doing a lot of research in this field. We're about to launch our 2nd consensus statement on interpersonal violence. We're also about to launch our 2nd consensus statement on holistic athlete development. This is really critical because we want to make sure that what we recommend to you works. So just want to reiterate that. We have many different educational courses available on Athlete 365, including courses specifically for youth, or specifically for coaches of youth, or specifically for many different ones. We have fact sheets and guidelines and toolkits. We're creating this community of practice of experts. And we also have grants. So we have grants that are available specifically. There's Athlete Commission grants, for example. There are also grants through Olympic Solidarity that specifically for programs focusing on mental health and safeguarding. And we have our Safeguarding Officer in Sport certificate. If there's something else that you think would be helpful that we're not doing, then we're all ears. We really want to make sure that we're developing things that are useful and pragmatic, not just for what we think, but also, of course, it's you that matters. Honestly, in this conversation. It's the athletes first, but it's you that can really make the difference. And finally, I'd like to finish on something which is quite pioneering. I'm really proud of this, but it's also a big, big topic. We did a survey last year, 2022, of all international federations, including the ISU, and we asked, what are the key challenges that you have around safeguarding, and particularly the escalation of cases from the national level to the international level? What are the key challenges? What's the status of safeguarding? It was 46 questions in that survey, so a big one. We had a 100% response rate, which was awesome, and thank you to ISU. And what we found effectively was that many organizations were receiving cases that were being escalated from the national level, and it was really challenging to be able to provide the appropriate support. It was really challenging to have the expertise. It was really challenging when you're so far away to ensure that the systems and structures are in place. And also, sports organizations have an essential role when it comes to safeguarding. That is prevention and the first steps in response. But to be clear, sports organizations' core competency is not then all the measures that somebody who has experienced violence needs. But the challenge is often there's a lack of access to those systems and services, or you're not sure where those systems and services are. So the IOC, we took this to the executive board, the voices of the international federations, and they announced a 10 million USD fund to strengthen safe sport at the local level. And they created a working group. And you can see here President Bach was there and was the one that then presented the results of the needs assessment and announced this 10 million fund March last year. The working group went away and deliberated. This working group included athletes with lived experience of abuse and representatives from across the Olympic movement. And in October, I had the honor of going back to the executive board in Mumbai and presenting the results. And what the working group recommended was the establishment of regional hubs, which are focused on response to harassment and abuse in the context of sport. Regional hubs which improve cooperation between sport and non-sport stakeholders so that anyone that's harmed by interpersonal violence in sport can have access to the support and care and guidance that they need in their local culture and in their local context. So the sport organization is able to assess what has been done and implement their disciplinary processes, et cetera, but in the meantime, there is a specialist hub that is taking care of those next steps and that support that athletes need, which is beyond usually longer-term support that is required to support the health and well-being of the person who has been harmed. So we're starting off with 2 regional hubs, one in Southern Africa and one in the Pacific Islands as a proof of concept. If these go well, and by well we mean they're helping athletes first and foremost, but also helping sports organizations in those regions to ensure better access to the care and support that's needed, we will seek to scale this across the Olympic movement. Again, the primary focus is on response. We're setting up an international safe sport task force to oversee this, and the task force is going to be not only representative of sport, but also intergovernmental organizations, so 3 big UN organizations, and also athletes and civil society organizations, because again, it is a collaborative, this needs collective effort. Sport is not alone in this, in terms of needing to facilitate better access to response to interpersonal violence. And we're also drafting a number of tools. So we're drafting the International Safe Sport Framework, which should be endorsed by the entire Olympic movement, and also reinforce the complementary but distinct role of state actors. We're also developing a number of other supporting tools, such as a classification tool. This classification tool is going to help organizations to be able to understand, it's basically a decision tree, whenever there is an incidence of harassment and abuse, to help organizations better understand now what should they do, where should they go, who should they access, what level is this, who do I need to bring on board when this happens. And we're also doing an assessment of the legal frameworks, because again, this is not something that just is sports to do alone. So I'm really pleased with this Safe Sport Regional Hub initiative, as we call it. It's going really well. We're in the process now of establishing 2 consortia in those pilot regions, and I'll let you know how it goes, but we should see the first 2 hubs operational by the end of next year. And this, again, I think is a real testament to the commitment of the Olympic movement in these topics of safeguarding and mental health. That's the end of my presentation, but I'd just like to reiterate my thanks to you for listening so attentively. My thanks again to the President for inviting me to speak today. I'm very grateful for this opportunity and happy to answer any questions later on if you would like me to. Thank you.
Let's give another big round of applause for Gracie and Kirsty Burrows. Through our external guest speakers, we now have a better understanding of healthy sports environment. And mental health is just as important as physical health, so we need to treat it very importantly. And Ms. Burrows, you highlighted the responsibility of the governing body, ourselves and our members, adults, entourages, and what we have to do in order to provide safe sport environment for our precious young athletes. We took a step today towards better safeguarding. Let's continue. Let's have proper understanding, robust policies, procedures, and support system for our athletes, our skaters. We recognize that this requires additional resources, adding extra work on top of the many initiatives that we are about to embark on. We understand the the extra work that we have to do. So therefore, the council proposes increasing the C contribution, annual C contribution by 20%. We propose earmarking this additional funding for specific initiative. At least for the coming 2 seasons, we want to focus on safeguarding. And we expect the members, you, to do the following 3 things. First, adopt safeguarding policies and procedures. Second, take training, either through safeguarding e-learning modules on the ISU e-Rink or through your NOCs. Third, increase awareness of safeguarding matters within your federation, including athletes, skaters, officials, and staff members. And we can tell you that we shall listen and we shall act. As emphasized in the biannual report, we are committed to keeping our sport clean and fair. So we'll continue to reinforce testing, educating, and campaigning. In addition, we'll collaborate with external entities. For example, ISU signed up with ITS Reveal program, which is a platform that enables anybody to anonymously and confidentially report suspicions of doping. Let's work together to keep our sport safe, clean and fair. We already introduced our sustainability strategy. Moving forward, we'll focus on execution, delivery of our strategy, and do all we can to fulfill our commitment to preserve nature. Next month, we'll announce sustainable event guidelines for the organizers, which should be helpful to event organizers. Central to our mission is growing skating participation and supporting talented skaters throughout the world. As shown this morning, we have a number of programs that are helping the skaters, and effective programs. We'll continue to advance this program and support you and your skaters better. We'll continue to evaluate our programs to ensure our fundings are used in a most efficient manner. Some programs are particularly effective in helping smaller members. One of them is the visiting program, introduced under my predecessor, President Jan Dijkema. In essence, this program sends a coach to you, the members, for a week or 2 to help training young athletes or coaches, or even help structure building the training system, training program for the members. Last season, 6 skaters from Indonesia, Poland, and Vietnam who benefited from this program participated in the Figure Skating Junior Grand Prix, and we expect to see more tangible results in the coming years. Because it supports small members directly and immediately, we plan to double down on this program, expand it. We also want to reinforce ISU Road to Ice program, which help and support inline skaters in transition to speed skating. We had, in January this year, we had Youth Olympic Games in Korea. And there I met 4 young skaters from Portugal, originally inline skaters, still inline skaters, but they went through the Road to Ice program to transition and learn how to speed skate on the ice, and they were part of the Youth Olympic Game, which was an amazing achievement. And perhaps one day they may be Olympians, or they may even be Olympic champions, because we already have 2 Olympic champions, Bart Swing, Aaron Jackson. 2 Olympic champions went through our Road to Ice program. We want to support your efforts to expand skating population. Switzerland has a very interesting program called Speedy Cup. In essence, this is about inviting kids to try and experience our beautiful sport, stay in it, hopefully, and fall in love with it. We'll explore if we can expand this concept as part of the Road to Ice program and roll it out in different countries. Given the effectiveness of the visiting coach and Road to Ice program, we would like to invest an additional 600,000 Swiss francs on these two programs. This means we want to increase the development project budget from 1.6 million Swiss francs a year to 2.2 million Swiss francs a year. We have discussed many exciting changes. We want to advance these priorities while upholding the highest standard of good governance. We'll continue to make progress in good governance practices. In fact, we expect to see another big jump in our scores September this year, just in a few months. And we'll continue to make efforts to improve our standing in terms of good governance practices. For example, before the end of this year, we'll establish ethical guidelines for ISU elections for 2026 and beyond. I want to talk about the first proposal that we have submitted for this Congress, which is to modernize Constitution and general regulation. ISU was founded in 1892, which makes us the second oldest international federation. And we should all be proud that we're still going strong, and we're still growing. But our Constitution is 132 years old and has had 58 amendments over the years. Since 2014 Congress, do you know how many proposals that we had to amend Constitution and general regulation? Take a wild guess. 5 Congresses. We have had 441 proposals for amendments. The result is bloated, difficult to follow, and inconsistent Constitution. It's a patchwork. We just kept adding on top of existing ones. So many of you told me that it's very difficult to follow our Constitution because the topic is just spread out all over the place, in Constitution, in general regulation, etc. And a lot of things that doesn't belong in Constitution. Let me just give you one example. In our Constitution, it even specifies job titles and responsibility of Secretary of Staff down to the regional assistant event manager. So, regional assistant event manager. Does that belong in our Constitution? Let's think about this. This kind of details restrain flexibility and adaptability, and it's not suited for today's rapidly changing world. So we are proposing to modernize the Constitution, make it more clear, more consistent, and enable us to be agile and more effective in delivering our Vision 2030. As we have done with other efforts, other initiatives, we will tackle this in a very transparent way, in very collaborative way. Upon your approval tomorrow, the Council will set up a drafting committee and search for an external law firm that has had experience in modernizing other respectful international federations. And I know some cases where old, not as old as ours, but old international federations that have recently gone through modernizing the Constitution to serve the members better, to serve the sports better. So we'll select a law firm that's suitable, capable, to help us along this journey. And we'll also set up a small member consultation group to work closely with the drafting committee. The drafting committee will engage you on various occasions, including webinars and member conferences in 2025. Proposals that you submitted related to governance for this Congress will be considered during the process. You would have the opportunity to voice your opinion, and you will always be invited to express your opinion before voting on the new constitution. We propose to organize an extraordinary Congress next year because actually some of you yesterday have expressed concern. Are you going to do this in 1 year? Does it take longer? Yes, it's a challenging task. It's a daunting task, a lot of work. But remember, if in 2026 is an election year, it will be very difficult to manage constitution and election in the same Congress year, which means we would have to wait another 3 years if we didn't do this next year. That's why we're proposing extraordinary Congress in 25. So we invite you, if you have any experience in modernizing Constitution and want to help, please send your name, member association, and relevant experience to this email address. I say in here we said Thursday, but let's do it by Wednesday, end of the day Wednesday. The council will take into consideration geography, branch, size, level of development, other factors when forming the consultation group. Because we have so many members, but we want to make sure that everybody's voice is reflected, everybody's voice is heard through the process. But don't worry, even if you are not part of the consultation group, you would have plenty of opportunities to express your views. This process will be open, transparent, and collaborative. You will be invited to engage and voice your opinion along the way. So rest assured that good governance will always be a core value of ISU and our Constitution. This concludes the 8 key priorities of Vision 2030 that we want to undertake for the coming years. Are you excited? The council is very excited. Can we hear you from your council? But to make this vision a reality, I want to emphasize again the 3 key enablers that are required. First, we must be open to change, however uncomfortable change may be, because the world is changing. Second, we have to enhance our capabilities because the world is changing and we want to remain competitive. Having Mr. Smith and Mr. Conrad, Jeremy Conrad Pickles, combining their different experience and expertise with existing ISU expertise, been very helpful. That's how we've been able to manage this, prepare this Vision 2030. And we are eager to implement and execute Vision 2030. But we need more. We need more resources. We talked about the plans, these new programs, but we need resources to deliver them, and we want to deliver them with you. So we need to enhance our capability. Finally, we have to have a long-term perspective and commitment to make necessary investment. You've heard enough of me today, so I'm going to close soon. But before I do, let me ask you this one thing. Can you turn your right? See who's there? Can you turn left? Can you look behind? What do you see? Yes, people, diverse group of people in terms of nationality, geography, language, branch, experience. Diverse group of people from 65 countries in person, more online. But there's one thing we have in common. Does anybody know what that is? We all love skating. And that's the very reason we are here today this week, That's the reason why we flew in from Brazil, Indonesia, Lithuania, from all over the place, Kazakhstan. We flew all the way from these countries, different continents, to be in Las Vegas, so we can talk about our future. That's the reason why we're here, because we all love skating, and we all want to do the right thing for the future generation of skaters, right? We are on the same boat. We are different, but we are on the same boat. And as long as we sail towards the same direction, we can reach the destiny, our bright future, our Vision 2030. So let's embark on this journey together for our bright future, our Vision 2030. We can do this. And remember, together, we can go further. Thank you. Thank you for enduring me for a long time. Now we move on to the next topic, agenda item A14, budget for the year of the Congress and the forthcoming 2-year period as submitted by the Council and the approved thereof. Before I give the floor to Mr. Conrad Pickles, let me inform you that Uli Linder has retired after long years of service. He decided to retire as a treasurer of ISU, and the council greatly appreciate the service that he has provided over 3 decades. So I'll ask you again to give a big round of applause for Uli Linder for his service. Please.
We're good. Good afternoon. And I'm now standing between you and your coffee break, so apologies for that. You have now heard the President and the Director General outline the many initiatives that the ISU will undertake in order to achieve Vision 2030. The members received prior to Congress a budget narrative as well as a detailed income statement breakdown for 2025 and 2026 and an updated budget for 2024. On the slides that follow, I will give an overview of some of these items which are included in the budgets that you have already seen. I will run through some of the initiatives and investments, categorizing them as follows. First, I will talk about revenue drivers, notably leveraging ISU assets and reinvigorating ISU commercial revenues, and will then cover some of the items related to opportunity and safeguarding. The next slide will take us quickly through further growth and innovation related to event presentation and delivery, our products and our interactions with fans through social media and other channels. The final piece will focus on innovation and unity as we seek to reform our constitution, improve collaboration with our stakeholders, and implement better tools in order to administer the Federation more efficiently. On the screen are the key points which inform the budgets we are proposing. It is, of course, important to note that transformation takes time, and the fruit of some of our initiatives that we propose to undertake over the next 2 to 3 years will only be seen anything between 4 and 8 years down the line. Furthermore, the budgets as presented include all the elements of what is a very ambitious program. There will inevitably be some delays and a certain number of things we are unable to do, which will have the effect of slowing down or reducing the planned expenditure. You can see on the screen, as already communicated, the last 3 columns showing first the updated budget for 2024 and then the proposed budgets for 2025 and 2026. You may have noticed that we are presenting certain line items slightly differently to what has been the case in the past. Event costs combines prize money, event contributions, and third-party costs, such as timing or scoring services, which have previously been shown under other operating costs. In contributions, we have also included contributions to junior events, which were previously included in development as council projects. For that reason, sports development is reduced, since it only includes the C contributions and the development projects. Sports governance includes the costs of Congress, council meetings, other committee meetings, as well as remuneration of officials and anti-doping costs. Returning to the numbers, the changes to 2024 relate to three main factors. First, the anticipated revenues which were budgeted in 2022 will not be achieved, similar to 2023, as a result of sponsor revenues being well below pre-COVID levels and the deterioration of the US dollar to the Swiss franc exchange rate. Second, we are increasing our expenditure on development, and we face increased costs around this Congress. Third, 2024 also includes the initial costs relating to the upgrade of our events and delivery of Vision 2030, which will require additional resources again in 2025 and 2026, during which time there will be continued investment in events and resources so that we will be ready beyond 2026 to deliver growth in revenues, audiences, and engagement on social platforms. Finally, you'll see a gradual increase in the investment returns as we rebalance our portfolios to achieve long-term growth, as the President has already described. We will inevitably pass through a period of significant deficits in order to set the Federation's course for the next decade and generate sustainable income growth. That is why you see significant operating losses and a net loss after investment returns. As you'll see in a later slide, we expect this situation to reverse in 2029, when we anticipate the operating result to start improving to such an extent that it will be covered by the investment returns. The first area of focus relates to growing our revenues, both those from our invested assets and the commercial revenues associated with ISU events. As the President mentioned earlier, the ISU has always maintained an extremely conservative investment strategy, which, when first implemented, made absolute sense, since bonds could generate in excess of 7% per annum coupon. However, over the past 20 years, that is shown on this graph, those returns have diminished year by year until in 2020, the assets were barely earning 3%. A simulation of the ISU portfolio using standard benchmarking indicates that had the ISU invested 10 years ago in a balanced portfolio, an additional 275 million Swiss francs would have been available to the Federation over the period. That is why the Council will be asking Congress to approve a wording change to the Constitution under Proposal 4 in order to facilitate the change in investment strategy. The second key growth area on the right-hand side of the screen relates to our commercial activities. The existing agency deals will come to an end following the Milan Cortina Olympic Winter Games and the following year. And one of our key objectives is to ensure that any new deal with an agency is delivering real growth and innovation. In addition to revenue growth, which will come later on in the cycle from 2027 onwards, we expect to see some faster growth from the implementation of the ISU Short Track World Tour. I believe that we have nonetheless remained realistic, even prudent, in our projections of these revenues. Safeguarding, as we've just heard in some powerful messages before, is a key pillar of the Go ISU Vision 2030 strategy. And we shall be providing, as the President has just outlined, an immediate assistance to help members implement their safeguarding strategy. This will come in the form of a 20% increase to the C contribution. As well as this assistance to all members, we are increasing the budgets associated with the Visiting Coach Programme and with annual seminars across the disciplines. We know that these are two of the most impactful areas of development expenditure. In total, the initiatives will add more than 1 million Swiss francs to the annual development budgets. For athletes, we have also planned increased prize money contributions in the coming years. As well as challenging our sales agencies in the next contract renewals, or even taking a more direct involvement in the sales process, revenue growth comes through an improvement of our product. And this is where a significant part of the new expenditure will take place: improving, innovating, and engaging. The President and the Director General have already presented the many innovations to you, and I shall not go through them again here. The final area that I wanted to focus on covers the innovation and unity, notably the reform of the Constitution, which will help us to improve governance from top to bottom and give us the agility to react and adapt as situations, challenges, and most importantly, opportunities arise. We will be working to upgrade technology platforms, be there our financial ERP system, collaborative platforms for our members, or sports-related systems linked to our competitions and results. All of these will put us in a position over the long term to manage the organisation in the most efficient way possible and to provide improved tools to you, our members. All of the initiatives which have been outlined by the President and the Director General, and which I have touched upon above, require the necessary human resources to deliver them. That is why a restructuring of the Secretariat is underway, and we shall be complementing the great talent that we already have with new skills and competences. Finally, we shall be looking for a new premises in Lausanne to accommodate headcount growth, but also to provide a modern, open, and collaborative workspace for staff. So returning to an overview of the budget, you will now appreciate, I think in a little bit more detail, why our costs are increasing first to 47 million Swiss francs and up to as much as 51 million in 2026 and 57 million by 2029. However, as you can also see, we expect after 2026 to start reducing the operating deficit, and combined with an increased financial return, we expect to achieve a surplus before the Olympic Winter Games in France in 2030. I shall be putting this chart back on the screen before we take questions and vote on the 2024 to 2026 budgets. However, before I do so, I wanted to quickly present the same numbers expressed in US dollars and also on a season-by-season basis. As you'll see, there's very little change, but it's important for us, I think, to see these numbers in US dollars, because when the results are presented at the 2026 Congress, they will be expressed in US dollars following the decision of the Council to change our functional currency. The numbers presented here have been restated for the past into US dollars at the respective average exchange rate for each year, and the budgets and projections in US dollars are the rates that have been used for the budgets you have previously seen. Looking at the numbers in US dollars allows us to see revenue trends in the currency in which they are contracted and will remove any lumpiness resulting from exchange movements on our investment Here on the screen, I have presented the numbers estimated on a season-by-season basis. Council will propose, as urgent proposal number 1, that Congress will approve the change to the ISU's financial year end. Most winter sports organisations, including US figure skating, have their financial year end in May, June or July, so that they can have a full picture of their sporting season. Furthermore, all of the ISU commercial agreements start on the first day of July each year and end on the 30th of June. So it is for transparency and ease of reading that we plan to switch to a June financial year end, helping the understanding of our members by providing a full financial picture of a sporting season. As you can see in the bottom right-hand corner, we expect to achieve a net surplus by the season 2029-2030. On that, I'll take you back to the slide year by year in Swiss francs, and I'll hand back to the President, who will take any questions or pass them to me before we move to a vote on the budgets. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Conrad Pickles. Dear members, dear friends, I want to emphasize the rationale behind this budget. We want to make our Vision 2030 a reality, and as we said many times, we need to be committed to invest to make this a reality. I also want to point out that in this proposed budget, a contingency budget is included in case some proposal will be accepted this week that require extra budget. However, should there be exceptional budget requirements exceeding contingency budget, these will be dealt with separately. This will be dealt separately as an addendum on Friday. Do you have any questions on the budget?
Sorry, it's again Austrian Speed, but I have some questions. The first question is, as far as I understood this, you put into your budget that you get the allowance to have a more risky strategy in investing. Yeah? So my question is, how can we decide about that before we decided about proposal number 4 you mentioned?
Do you want me to? Okay. Look, I think first of all, I would, I'm afraid, not agree with the term a risky strategy. Clearly, any investment strategy, return is related to risk. I think everyone out there understands that. If you take a little bit more risk, generally it's because you want to achieve a little bit more return. But I think the President set up a wealth management working group. It had a number of experts on it. They went through a very detailed, thorough, vigorous process, selecting an investment advisor. The investment advisor that has been provisionally selected is one based here in the United States with a huge amount of experience. The Council has seen their presentation and is comfortable with the strategy going forward in order to effectively achieve the returns that we should be making on our assets. Otherwise, the assets are not working for this federation.
Yeah, sorry, but this is no answer to my question. My question was, you need the change of the proposal 4, and if this change is done, we can decide about your new budget. We cannot decide on this before we decided on proposal 4.
Thank you. I think, as we've already said, we will come back on Friday if there's any addendum required to the budget. So this case...
So no decision until Friday?
No, that's not what I said.
Good.
Okay.
Fine, thank
so
you.
we will proceed to the vote on the budget.
Okay, thank you.
The proposal on the investment policy, should there be a vote on that, which is not in line with what has been included in the budget, then we would address that as part of the addendum on the budget discussion on Friday. Thank you. Please. Deborah, someone's coming to help you now.
Challenged. Oh, it's good. Firstly, thank you very much. Deborah Armstrong, Canada Figure. Thank you very much for the excellent presentation. Just a point of clarification, on the investment portfolio, is it invested in multiple currencies or in US dollars? Just wanting to understand the exchange risk.
Sure, the current investment portfolio, or the future investment portfolio.
What?
The current investment portfolio is more than 3/4 invested in US dollars. So the two of the three banks that we currently have are measured in US dollars. There is a part that is still in Swiss francs. The future investment portfolio will be measured 100% in US dollars, but the investment advisor is free to invest in other currencies. It is then their responsibility to hedge those currencies properly, because they will be measured on a US dollar return.
Thank you. The question was for clarification on the exchange risk.
Thank you. President Kim, Mr. Smith, Mr. Pickles, ISU Secretariat, thank you for all the hard work you have done day in and day out. I'm Miki Hirai for Japan Skating Federation. Japan welcomes the courage of ISU to change and work toward the betterment of our sports, so we're eager to work with you on the Vision 2030. And so we do appreciate this budget. And we just have one clarification as well. In the distributed budget, we saw that for figure skating, LED boards are earmarked with 0.6 million Swiss francs and 1.2 million in year 2025-26, as stated in the budget. Now, with not much investment or interest today by sponsors to show presence on the boards, what is the projected income increase from changing the boards to LED, if you have any ballpark figure? And how should we respond to the current sponsors' concerns that increased cost but possible diluted exposure due to turning to LED? But the real question here is more about prioritization. If we want to really have betterment and context to the younger generation, attracting new fans, we have to make our figure skating more interesting and easy to understand. And we would like to prioritize investing that money to AI judging supporting system, because that really is coveted by the skaters, judges, and the fans, and it appears the initial costs are about similar. Thank you.
Colin, did you want to take the...
Sure, thank you. With regards to the sponsorship program, thank you first of all for the question. With regards to the sponsorship program, as I outlined in the presentation, we are bound currently under current contracts, and we will work very closely with the sponsors of those contracts to ensure, obviously, that all rights are delivered. It's our belief, actually, with the investment in LED, that we will actually over-deliver to the current set of sponsors with the LED, because we will not open it up to further sponsors in those contracts for figure skating, for example. What we are talking about when we talk about increased sponsorship is there are still numerous sponsorship slots on figure skating which remain unsold. Short track, there's a lot of sponsorship slots which remain unsold. Speed skating, we have some remaining unsold. Synchro, we had the World Championship Synchronized Skating Championships with no sponsors. So when we talk about the increase of sponsors and the increased potential, it's even within the context of the restrictions that we have with the agreements that we have. Now, when we fast forward to have more flexibility, that's when the LED also then comes into its own in the context of figure skating. Because there we will be able to segment much greater by athlete or by nationality and work with the sponsors so that we really are more targeted in actually what they want. Because there's many countries where, you know, a Japanese sponsor may not be that interested in, or the logos are in Japanese, but it's an event in Europe. So we can be much more flexible and dynamic with how we use the signage. So I think, long answer, but it's a two-phase approach. There's a lot we can do now, but there's a lot more we can do once we move into the next Olympic cycle. With regards to the AI, there is indeed budget in the current budget, or money in the current budget, to develop those AI tools. We agree with you completely that it is essential, that we move forward into this field. What I would say is that the initial discussions we had with some of the companies, whilst there could be an expensive solution for ISU, it would have been a solution which would have been absolutely cost prohibitive for any member to implement on their own. And so what we prefer to do, and these are the discussions that we're having with Swiss Timing, is to come up with a system of computer vision and AI, which not only we can use, but that is more usable and more readily available to members for their own purposes. So again, this is a process. We're not there yet, but we need to invest in order to start this process. Thank you.
Thank you for the reassuring answers, and we're very excited about it. Thank you.
Thank you for your excitement. Any other questions? If not, we proceed to voting.
Okay, thank you. We'll proceed first with a show of hands. We need a simple majority for this. So the question is, do you approve the updated 2024 budget, the 2025 budget, and the 2026 budget in Swiss francs? All those in favor, if you could raise your green cards, please. Thank you. All those against, if you could raise your red card, please. All those abstaining, please raise your white card. Okay, I believe we have only one against and 2 abstain. I think there were two white. So, President, it is overwhelmingly passed.
Thank you very much for Thank you very much for your overwhelming support for our Vision 2030 and the budget required to deliver Vision 2030. So we embark on the future journey towards our 2030 brighter future. Yes, we'll have some bumps here and there. We run into rocky sail on the way, but as long as we are determined to make this happen, we can make it. We've already proven how resilient we are during the COVID period and how strong we came back in the seasons following the COVID. So we have a very strong federation with dedicated members, and we can make this a reality. Thank you again for your overwhelming support. This concludes the full Congress session for today.
Okay, so we're now going to break for coffee before proceeding into the branch workshops. So coffee will be available outside, and the branch workshops will start at 4:15. The figure skating branch will meet in this room, so you'll stay in this room. Speed skating branch convenes in the room next door. And the full Congress starts tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Thank you.